Hello, welcome to Liberty Wolf, episode number 25. My name is Zach Strong, the creator of this podcast. If you are new, I hope you enjoy what you're listening to. I invite you to go subscribe and to, more importantly, share this content with other people. Get these important messages out to folks. Now, today's is going to be on a topic that I'm a little bit of an expert on, communism. And I want to get across a very specific message, namely that communism is treason. It is not only ideological treason to everything that Americans stand for, but it is, under my personal conception of law, order, freedom, the Constitution, treason. And what will be very clear, though, is that as a bare minimum, it is a criminal offense, even according to the United States government. And that's really what I want to get into. On August 24th, 1954, President Eisenhower signed into law the Communist Control Act, or the Communist Control Act of 1954. It was an extension or amendment to the Internal Security Act of 1950. It amended certain sections and added more to it. It gave it a little bit more teeth, perhaps, but more importantly, it specified which subversive organizations that the former act referred to would be targeted, would be prohibited. Specifically, it talked about communism and the Communist Party by whatever name it decided to rename itself, because they knew that the communists were famous for just renaming themselves and going underground, or changing the facade on the building, and we're something new. No, you're not. Your principles are identical. Your goals are still the same. And so these acts, and a couple others I'll mention later on, are very important to remember. The Communist Control Act, parts of it have been repealed. However, parts of it are still in the books. And so I call upon President Donald Trump and anyone else in a position of public trust to use and enforce the Communist Control Act and any other relevant piece of legislation that has been passed or that could be passed to squash, to crush, to eliminate this communist conspiracy in our midst. We have a communist conspiracy. It is a worldwide global conspiracy. They openly talked about the world revolution, or the World October, referring to the October Revolution. They've used a lot of different terms. People refer to this as globalism or internationalism. Sometimes you'll see people try to differentiate the communist world revolution from the Fabian socialist revolution or the Western globalist. You can't differentiate the two. The two support one another, and the two work towards the same goals. For example, you'll find if you dig into this that Wall Street has actually funded communism to a very large extent. Wall Street, the so-called capitalists. In reality, they are not capitalists, though that's the name we give them. They're not free enterprise or free market individuals or companies and foundations and whatnot. Instead, they are capitalists in the sense that Lenin, the arch communist, Lenin was a capitalist rather. He specifically said his agents should support and advocate and try to implement what he called state capitalism. Now that's interesting. You have one of the arch communists of all time advocating state, quote-unquote, capitalism, state capitalism, which is what? It's state domination of the economy. So socialism, communism. Today we've come up with other fancy names like corporatism and crony capitalism, or in the past they would have called it mercantilism. But whatever, it's state domination of economics and every other facet of your life. Now, again, communism is the conspiracy. It is the worldwide force. More people are enslaved under communism than under any other force. The communists have killed more people than any other group. Yes, they're funded by the Western section of this conspiracy, but it's the communists who are the most radical. It's the communists who will be the only ones who benefit from our country and the West plunging headlong into socialism, because socialism leads to communism. And what is communism? Again, I've said communism is treason. honestly, it's Satanism, but I'm not going to talk about the religious aspects today. I've done that before. I've done that in my books. But today I'll just refer to the practical aspects. That is, it is a criminal dictatorship. It is a mafia-style government. It is gangsterism. It is legalized plunder, as Frederick Bastiat called it. It is legalized criminality. Again, whatever the law says, that's not some virtuous thing, just automatically. A virtuous law, a just law, is one that actually upholds your individual rights and freedom. But communist version of the law is whatever the party says, whatever the little ruling clique of gangsters happens to say, whatever their dictates and whims are at any given time. So in other words, it's a centralization and monopolization of total power, economic power, political power, social power, cultural power, even a total monopoly over your mind, your religious beliefs. That's communism. State domination of your life. That's communism. Some people refer to it as statism, collectivization, collectivism, whatever. It doesn't really matter what you call it. There are a million different terms: Marxism, Bolshevism, Maoism, Marxist-Leninism, Fabian socialism. The whole works. Just call it tyranny if you want. That's what it is. State domination of your life. You, the individual, are nothing. It's the collective that rules. And in reality, the collective doesn't even rule. It's this small group that rules the collective. Right? This international group of gangsters. They're a rootless clique. They have no one home base. It's not only Moscow. It's not only New York. It's not only Tel Aviv. It's not only Paris or London or Beijing or any of these other world centers of power. It's an international conspiracy. These people are at home in London, just like they'd be at home in Tel Aviv, just like they'd be at home in New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, or Moscow. Okay, what matters to them is their ideology. At the top, they're Satanists, but the lower level dupes, they're probably not Satanists. They're just corrupt and conniving and seek power and wealth and fame and want to dominate your life because they think they're better than you. Okay, but so you have this elite group of satanic communists at the top, and then under them you have the other criminals. All right, and so taken all together, it's a gigantic pyramid scheme of total corruption and total usurpation and total domination of your life, your willpower. Okay, and so when I refer to a global conspiracy, you might refer to it as globalism, internationalism, but just know that what I'm talking about is this ideological thing, whatever you want to call it, this monstrosity that Karl Marx helped polish off, but he didn't originate it. Marxism was created, at the beginning of time, but in more modern terms, it was put together by Adam Weishaupt. He was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati. The Order of Illuminati is what spawned communism. That's very easy to actually look through the historical record and put the pieces together, and you go from the Order of Illuminati, you go from the Order of Illuminati to the Jacobins, to the German Union, to the League of Outlaws, and so on and so forth, until you come to this group called the League of the Just. A bunch of Marxists, that's what they would be called later, Illuminati stooges, Illuminati conspirators. They called themselves the League of the Just and moved to England, and then they hired Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, to take these ideas they already had and put them together into a polished off manifesto so they could publish them to the world, because they thought at that time, 1848, it was their time to come out of the closet, to come out of the secret chambers that they were plotting and hatching world revolution in. It was time to take off the mask and just declare revolution on the whole world and declare war on the world. And so that's what they did with the Communist Manifesto, 1848, February. And then immediately thereafter, revolutions sparked all over Europe. Just magically, I'm sure, right? There's no coincidence there. Wink, wink. So, those fizzled out, though, and the Communist League, the League of the Just renamed themselves the Communist League. And then they renamed themselves later into a number of different things, and they came to be called the Social Democratic Workers' Party. And then that was led by Vladimir Lenin. who coined his faction of the group the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks, supported by the Fabian socialists, who were actually Marxists. They were very well acquainted with Karl Marx. George Bernard Shaw actually dated Marx's daughter for a period of time. They were very well acquainted, very much adherents to his Marxist ideology, that which was put in the Communist Manifesto. They created Fabian socialism to operate slightly differently in the West, a little bit more by gradualism. And that was not coincidence. The Fabian socialists are not different than the Eastern Bolsheviks and communists. All that they did is they're advocating a different strategy for implementing the same principles in the West. So please don't be confused by this fictitious East-West divide. Yes, there are real fissures in that. The group in Moscow and the group in Beijing, they really do want power for themselves. They want to be the ones on top. Any criminal group, if you're, in any mob, the person desires to be the head of that mob family, right? They don't want to just be one of the underlings, of course. They're all working together towards the same criminal ends, but of course, each one of them wants to be the guy in charge. So that's how it is. They're fighting for the same exact principles. They want this world government. They're both East and West. They're together and created the United Nations and all this. But of course, there are these real fissures in that each side wants to be the guy on top. No one wants to play second fiddle, right? And so the Moscow-based communists, they do not think they're going to play second fiddle. People in New York also think they're not going to be backup. They each think they're going to be in charge. And that's one of the things that's going to lead to World War. But World War, either way, will benefit the overall global communist conspiracy. Okay, now, with that context a little bit in mind, this thing we call communism is not just another political party. The Communist Party USA is not just another political party like the Republicans, Democrats, Constitution Party, Independent American Party, the Prohibition Party, whatever other famous, well-known party you want to point your finger at in the United States. Okay, it's not that. You cannot just say this is just another thing. They're just different. No, they're not just different. It's totally different in every single way, including their goals. See, ostensibly the goals of Republicans and Democrats, right, are to put the best person forward, help lead the country democratically, according to the Constitution, right? That's what they're supposed to anyway, right? They take these oaths of office. The communists, though, they reject all of that and say, no, we're going to crush all of the other groups. We're going to put a dictatorship over the land. We're going to get rid of the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, which was ratified by the people. They want to, trample on the will of the American people and say, we don't really care what you want. We're going to be in charge of your life. We're going to usurp all power. We're going to strip you of those rights that are in the Bill of Rights protected therein. So this is not just another thing. Their stated goal is to create a criminal dictatorship, not only over America, but over the whole world. And so the Communist Party USA is just a wing of this greater internationalist, satanic Marxist conspiracy. So that has to be central in your mind. You have to comprehend that fact. And that's what the goal is today. By this explanation, plus a little bit of the following. As I mentioned in the introduction, communism, in my perception, is treason, because you can't say we're going to overthrow the United States, to hell with the will of the American people, and not be considered a traitor. That is the very definition, in my mind, of treason. Now, yes, the Constitution has a very narrow legal definition, but in any normal sense, communism is treason, and it's going to be one of the works of my life to get that across to people until they start saying the same thing. Communism is treason. Communism is evil. Communism is the enemy. Okay, and so, but again, as I said, even the United States government, back during the Cold War, they had at least 4 different pieces of legislation. I'm sure there are more, but at least 4 that I can think of off the top of my head that were targeting communists and communist organizations or subversive groups, and that were criminalizing them and penalizing them, and in some cases outlawing them. You had in 1940, you had the Alien Registration Act, or more popularly called the Smith Act. Okay, that said subversive groups must register with the United States government. You have to register with the Attorney General, and so that they know you are a subversive group. You are on this list. And what is a subversive group? One that has as its goal, or stated goals and its principles or in its actions, trying to overthrow the Constitution of the United States. This system that is ratified by the American people and which can only be changed by, as George Washington put it, an authentic act of the whole people. That was from his farewell address, I believe, 1796. So you cannot have a group say, yeah, we're going to overthrow this entire system, regardless of what the American people thinks, and not have them be a subversive group. That's the very definition of subversive. And in my opinion, it's the very definition of treasonous. So communist organizations, by default, are treasonous and traitors. Okay, so the Smith Act in 1940 required these type of groups to register. Then again, in 1950, you had the Internal Security Act that's talked a little bit more specifically about communism, but it was still a little bit broad. Just kind of enforced that a little more heavily, gave it some more teeth. In 1954, you had the Communist Control Act passed in Congress August 19th, signed by President Eisenhower August 24th, which is coming up in 2 days now, the 66th anniversary. And so that, it still had teeth in it, but it kind of watered it down a little bit. But at the same time, it was even more specific, though. So even though the penalties were perhaps watered down a little bit, it was more specific in saying the communists are traitors. Communist groups are treasonous. And they should be outlawed. This is an act of Congress saying we should outlaw the Communist Party USA and any other group bearing that name and goal. And so I'm going to read to you a part of the actual Communist Control Act of 1954. This is legislation. Parts of it were repealed, but this is the bulk of it is still legislation on the books, to the best of my knowledge. Now here it goes. Quote, "The Congress hereby finds and declares that the Communist Party of the United States, although purportedly a political party, is in fact an instrumentality of a conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. It constitutes an authoritarian dictatorship within a republic, demanding for itself the rights and privileges accorded to political parties, but denying to all others the liberties guaranteed by the Constitution. Unlike political parties, which evolve their policies and programs through public means, by the reconciliation of a wide variety of individual views, and submit those policies and programs to the electorate at large for approval or disapproval, the policies and programs of the Communist Party are secretly prescribed for it by the foreign leaders of the world communist movement. Its members have no part in determining its goals and are not permitted to voice dissent to party objectives. Unlike members of political parties, members of the Communist Party are recruited for indoctrination with respect to its objectives and methods and are organized, instructed, and disciplined to carry into action slavishly the assignments given them by their hierarchical chieftains. Unlike political parties, the Communist Party acknowledges no constitutional or statutory limitations upon its conduct or upon that of its members. The Communist Party is relatively small numerically and gives scant indication of capacity ever to attain its ends by lawful political means. The peril inherent in its operation arises not from its numbers, but from its failure to acknowledge any limitation as to the nature of its activities, and its dedication to the proposition that the present constitutional government of the United States ultimately must be brought to ruin by any available means, including resort to force and violence. Holding that doctrine, its role as the agency of a hostile foreign power renders its existence a clear, present, and continuing danger to the security of the United States. It is the means whereby individuals are seduced into the service of the world communist movement, trained to do its bidding, and directed and controlled in the conspiratorial performance of their revolutionary services. Therefore, the Communist Party should be outlawed. the Communist Party of the United States, or any successors of such party, regardless of the assumed name, whose object or purpose is to overthrow the government of the United States, or the government of any state, territory, district, or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force and violence, are not entitled to any of the rights, privileges, and immunities attendant upon legal bodies created under the jurisdiction of the laws of the United States, or any political subdivision thereof, and whatever rights, privileges, and immunities which have theretofore been granted to said party or any subsidiary organization by reason of the laws of the United States or any political subdivision thereof, are hereby terminated. Whoever knowingly and willfully becomes or remains a member of 1. The Communist Party, or 2. Seizure or overthrow of the government, or any other organization having for one of its purposes or objectives the establishment, control, conduct, seizure, or overthrow of the government of the United States, or the government of any state or political subdivision thereof, by the use of force or violence, with knowledge of the purpose or objective of such organization, shall be subject to all the provisions and penalties of the Internal Security Act of 1950 as amended as a member of a communist action organization. For the purposes of this section, the term Communist Party means the organization now known as the Communist Party of the United States of America, the Communist Party of any state or subdivision thereof, and any unit or subdivision of any such organization, whether or not any change is hereafter made in the name thereof. Close quote. Okay, now that's a lot, and I'm going to analyze it a little bit more, but first I'm going to skip a little forward in the same legislation. What it does, it then goes on and lists 13 specific acts which could be used by juries to determine one's, quote, membership or participation in one of these prohibited communist organizations. And I'm going to only mention 4 of them to you. It says, you could be investigated, hauled before a court, and penalized if you are one who has, quote, prepared documents, pamphlets, leaflets, books, or any other type of publication in behalf of the objectives and purposes of the organization, close quote, or one who has, quote, mailed, shipped, circulated, distributed, delivered, or in any other way sent or delivered to others material or propaganda of any kind in behalf of the organization, close quote, or one who has, quote, indicated by word, action, conduct, writing, or in any other way, a willingness to carry out in any manner and to any degree the plans, designs, objectives, or purposes of the organization, close quote, or, finally, one who has, quote, made financial contribution to the organization in dues, assessments, loans, or in any other form, close quote. To me, that's highly significant, especially the last one. Anyone who's made financial contributions to the Communist Party or any other communist organizations or any other organizations that have as their goal the overthrow of the United States government. Now that is huge. That's George Soros. Okay? We're always talking about George Soros funding things with his foundations, all the various subsidiaries thereof. They pump money into Black Lives Matter and all these other subversive groups. So under the Communist Control Act, they could be hauled before a jury and penalized. Okay, this would include, again, the Rothschilds, their agents here in the United States. That would include the Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, a whole host of different foundations and groups. So that's very significant. But on top of that, then anyone who has ever mailed, shipped, circulated, distributed, delivered, or written or published or put out a book, leaflet, pamphlet, in our day, a website, a blog post, any of that, or who has ever indicated in writing or by their conduct a willingness to carry out these secretive plans and designs and objectives, that is, the overthrow of the United States government or the Constitution, any of those people who've done any of those things, they are criminals under United States law. Criminals. And they can be hauled before juries. Why isn't this being enforced? Think of how infested our country has become with these radical communist, Marxist, socialist groups. I mean, here's just a small list of some of the groups that, if I were in charge, would be hauled before a court and penalized to every full extent of the law and any extent of any law I could make appear, quite frankly. The Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is anything but a foundation for peace, right? The Democratic Party, for crying out loud. The Communist Party USA, the Revolutionary Communist Party USA, the Socialist Party USA, Democratic Socialist of America, Party for Socialism and Liberation, World Socialist Party of the United States, Progressive Labor Party, Industrial Workers of the World, Fabian Society, Young Communist League USA, North American Man-Boy Love Association, okay, the NAMBLA, Mattachine Society, which doesn't really function today anymore, but it could have been hauled back in its day before a court, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Political Affairs, which is a journal from the Communist Party USA, and that could be shut down. The People's World, another publication of the CPUSA. Liberation News, they're the website for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And there's a whole host of other things. I mean, ACORN, Code Pink, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which 91 members of the U.S. Congress openly belong to. The new Black Panther Party, Antifa, which our government has now, under Donald Trump, thank the Lord, has declared a terrorist organization. Though they're not really doing much about it yet. Hopefully they will. But at least it's on the books now. It's out there in the open. They're a terrorist organization. They're a 100-year terrorist organization that should have been banned when they came into existence by Jewish Marxist radicals back in the day. Okay, Black Lives Matter would be on the list. You could prevent the whole Rothschild clan from ever stepping foot back in the United States. This would be, you could use this and all these other acts that I've mentioned, Smith Act and so forth, to thoroughly crush the Communist Party USA and the whole communist conspiracy. You could do it. You could snuff it out, or you could make it so ineffectual and so powerless that it would mean nothing. Now, there was also, in 1950, an act called the Emergency Detention Act. This was unfortunately repealed by President Nixon in September of 1971. And it's really, really unfortunate. Here's part of his statement when he repealed it. He said, "No president has ever attempted to use the provisions of this act, and while 6 detention camps were established and funded by the Congress, none of them was ever used for the purpose of this legislation. In fact, all 6 camps have been abandoned or used for other purposes since 1957. Nevertheless, the mere continued existence of these legal provisions has aroused concern among many Americans that the act might someday be used to apprehend and detain citizens who hold unpopular views." Close quote. Well, they should have been used to, apprehend and detain citizens. Use that term very loosely. A traitor isn't really a citizen, in my opinion. It should have been used to round up the communists and the socialists, the self-declared Marxists. We need another bill, another emergency detention act. We need to create more detention camps. Look, detention camps are what are used to house illegal aliens when they're captured illegally crossing the border. Okay, so detention camps are not some sort of weird un-American thing. They can be a very good thing to round up communists. Did you know that in the 50s, our government built internment camps, basically, concentration camps for communists? We never used them, unfortunately, but did you know that? To me, I applaud that. That's what needs to happen. We need a president with the cojones to put forward an act like this and to enforce it, to round up these communist groups, all of them, just round them all up. Shut down their publications, outlaw their parties, haul them before a jury, throw these people in prison, execute some of them if need be, if you can really nail down in court that they have really been engaging in subversion. We can't have those people here. Or if you want, exile them, I guess. But they cannot remain part of society. When you have a cancer, do you just leave it in your body? Get along, peacefully coexist with the other organs and things in the body. No! You obliterate it. You cut it out. You use, whatever therapy you want to. You get it out of your body so it can't continue doing damage. You cannot allow the Communist Party USA to exist in the United States and not have it tear down this country eventually. You cannot allow that to happen. You cannot allow a group that says, we hate you and your Constitution and your freedom, and we're going to overthrow all of them. You cannot have a group like that exist in your country for a decade. 1919, the first Communist Party was created in Chicago. 101 years now since this abomination has been allowed to exist in this country. We have not rounded up communists. We have not prosecuted communists. We haven't done anything. We don't even talk about communists anymore. I mean, it's starting to creep back into the public consciousness the fact that there really are communist groups. Hey, looks like we didn't really win the Cold War, did we? I've been trying to get that through to people for a lot of years, since I was 12 years old, actually. So for 21 years, I've been trying to tell people the Soviet Union did not collapse. It faked its demise, according to every communist defector ever, and according to any real look at the situation. It was a carefully crafted deception. It was stage theater. It was a theater production. Kabuki theater, right? It was total misdirection. They did détente earlier in the Cold War. Trick the West. Oh, we're just gonna, have peaceful relations for a while. In fact, they just used that time period to rearm, regroup, re-strategize, and then they came back when they were ready at full force again. And I can show you, and I've done it in my book, Red Gadiantons. I've quoted Pravda, right? Pravda, the famous or infamous Soviet mouthpiece, right? I have quoted them in my book, showing that they are laughing at the West. The fact that the West, thought that they actually gave up their ambitions. The fact that they thought Russia let their military lapse. They're just cracking up over there. The thing that we're so naive. Anyway, but we are naive. At the very top, I think they know full well what they're doing, and they're going along with the deception because, again, this worldwide conspiracy, they're all part of it. And so it benefits the whole to let people think communism died, Russia is reformed. No, that didn't happen. Moscow is still communist. For crying out loud, Vladimir Putin, who just poisoned his big rival, Navalny, the other day. If you didn't see that in the news, go look that up. Anyway, Putin is an ex-KGB officer. He was head of the FSB for a period of time. He has carried out false flag terrorist bombings in his own country. He's poisoned all sorts of opposition. He's invaded Crimea, and so on and so forth. He's a tyrant. He pretends he's a big Christian, and they make a big show of, prohibiting homosexuality and things like that. And so people in the West are duped by it, and they think, oh, Russia's some bastion of traditionalism. I've lived there. I lived there for 2 years. No, it's not. Trust me on that. If you don't trust me, go to my website, theamericancitadel.com, and look up my articles on the subject. Anyhow, my point is, no, communism is not dead. It never died. It just went underground like it always has. It's always done that over and over again. I mentioned in 1848, when the League of the Just, the Illuminati-spawned organization, called itself the Communist League, started all these revolutions and published the Communist Manifesto. When that fizzled out, they just renamed themselves. But it was the same group with the same ideology. And they eventually went on to become the Bolsheviks who took over Russia with Western aid and money. Okay, so let's not be fooled. I mean, just turn on your TV and look at the mass rioting going on, and look at these people carrying around hammer and sickle Soviet flags, doing the raised fist. The raised fist in the air is an abhorrent symbol. It is not a symbol of liberation or freedom, except in the Marxist sense of liberation. They love to throw that word around. Liberation to them is them coming into full power over you. So their liberation is your subjugation. All right. So anyway, everyone's up there. Black Lives Matter, their official logo, right, has the communist raised fist. The communists have their fist being red. Black Lives Matter has theirs in black, of course. But all these groups, Antifa, they're all communist organizations. So how anyone could try to say, no, communism is not a threat, when you watch it on your TV, them rioting, burning down property, burning down buildings, murdering people. Literally, they've murdered people, blinding police with lasers. They've taken over whole neighborhoods. They're actually marching into white neighborhoods now, Black Lives Matter, and demanding the white people give them their homes. Say, give us your homes. That's reparations for slavery. Reparations for so-called, systemic institutionalized racism, which does not exist and never did in this country. Black Lives Matter. Let's go to them for a moment. to really enforce this point that communism is here and alive and well, and it should make us invoke the Communist Control Act and put these people behind bars or 6 feet under. Not really concerned which. So, if you did not know, Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 self-described queers and Marxists. That's the word they use for themselves, queers, queer activists. But there are also at least 2 of them have admitted they're trained Marxists. See, some people say, oh, you would just call anyone a Marxist if you disagree with them. Well, that's what they called themselves. So here are the 3 founders. They have strange names: Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Khan-Coulors, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now, the latter of those 3, the weed-smoking Patrice Khan-Coulors, she, again, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, she said this, quote, "Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists." Close quote. That's from a 2015 interview. Did you catch that? Black Lives Matter, co-founder, self-proclaimed queer, also said, we are trained Marxists. Trained Marxists. Did you catch that? Trained Marxists? Not just, oh, we believe in some of the principles. They're trained. They are trained subversive agitators. They are trained criminals. They are traitors. There's no other word for it. Communism is treason, and these Marxist communists are trained. What is a trained Marxist? It's one who's trained to implement by hook or crook the Marxist, Communist, Bolshevik, Leninist ideology. So in other words, overthrow the Constitution of the United States, fundamentally transform, as Barack Obama, the communist mole, said, this country. And they're doing that culturally right now. They're forcing ridiculous hate crimes legislation. They're tearing down cultural icons, statues, and whatnot. They're canceling this whole cancel culture BS. If you go back and look at my last podcast episode, number 24, it's titled "Cancel Culture is Communist Culture," and I go into that. Again, this whole thing is a communist movement. It's just part of the worldwide communist revolution. It's ongoing, folks. It never stopped. It did not start in 1917. It started a long time before that. It didn't start in 1848 with Karl Marx. It started, at least in modern times, in 1776, May 1st, when Adam Weishaupt founded the Order of Illuminati. And I've just detailed some of that history for you. Go look up my book, Red Gadiantons, or my other book, A Century of Red. I talk about it there. Or go to my website, theamericancitadel.com. Look up my article on the Order of Illuminati that I published earlier this year. I detail the history, give you some sources, whatnot. Okay. So you have to understand this is part of a global conspiracy, which is a couple hundred years in the making. It worked by gradualism, but now it's in the final stages. We're in the final stages. This is the end game. Okay. Now, I want to point out one other thing with this Black Lives Matter cult. These queer, self-described queer activists who founded it, who are also trained Marxists, remember. Now, what about that queer thing, the LGBTQIA+, W, X, Y, and Z, whatever you want to call it? They also, that whole LGBT movement was founded by communists. Harry Hayes, he founded the Mattachine Society, which was the first homosexual organization in the United States. He was a high-ranking member of the Communist Party, I believe out of California. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You dig in all these organizations, you always find communists lurking. A large percentage of these happen to be Jewish communists, and you can go into different reasons for that. But more importantly, even than that, they are ideologically communists. Throughout the whole world, the conspirators against mankind, you look, you dig, you find that they believe in the planks of the Communist Manifesto. Maybe slight variations here or there. A little bit different veneer on the outside. but they believe in the same principles. They believe in promoting the same cult of gangsterism and government monopoly and total control over your life, state domination of your life, of the economy, of everything. That's what they promote. It's global dictatorship, ruled by them, of course. Now, I want to go, in case my point about the Communist Party USA being a wing of this international communist conspiracy to overthrow our country and freedom, Constitution. If I wasn't persuasive enough, I want to quote an ex-communist. This man is named, I'm sure he's long since dead by now, but his name was Louis Francis Boudince. He wrote several books. He was a pretty high-level communist in the Communist Party USA. He actually was one of the chief editors for the Daily Worker, the infamous magazine. When he became disillusioned with this, when he realized it was, a foreign-controlled cult that was violent and would do anything possible to snuff out freedom, not make things better, he became disillusioned and finally left and collaborated with the FBI and whatnot to try to help bring this down. He wrote several books, and my favorite of which is called Men Without Faces, The Communist Conspiracy in the USA. Please go read that book. Really brilliant, fantastic, amazing book. Okay. Now, he wrote the purpose of the book was, quote, to demonstrate that the Soviet dictatorship and its fifth column in this country constitute a clear and present danger to the existence of the United States. Now, isn't that interesting? Clear and present danger to the existence of the United States. That's almost identical wording that the Communist Control Act used. Okay? So here's an actual ex-communist backing up the Communist Control Act and saying, yes, it is. It's a clear and present danger to the very existence of this country as a confederated republic, as a constitutional republic. Okay? He said, by the book, he said, I want to show beyond question that the Communist Party is not a political party in the American or democratic sense, but solely a fifth column of the Kremlin. Close quote. Now, you could add it's also a fifth column of the Wall Street funders, whatever. Whoever issues the exact orders, not really super important. Again, this is a global conspiracy, and they all collaborate together. Now, he went on in his amazing book. He said this, something very interesting. When he came to the Daily Worker magazine every morning, he said, quote, every morning as I entered my office, I stepped from American to alien soil. Close quote. So he stepped from American to alien soil. That's pretty fascinating. Again, these people are so alien and foreign to everything America stands for that he classified that as alien soil, even though it was technically U.S. soil, right? A lot of these people, even to this day, a lot of the same cultural agitators and provocateurs stir things up. They're actually, a lot of them, foreigners. Agents of Russia. They pose as Eastern Europeans and Germans. They use fake passports and whatnot, but they are like Spetsnaz and specially trained intelligence officers who speak English to a T. These people are here. It just broke, I think yesterday, the news that there was a Green Beret, American Army Green Beret veteran who had I believe it was for 15 years, actually been giving intelligence information to Russia. So he was just arrested, I think, yesterday or within the last couple of days. This story broke last night is when I saw it. So these people are using our people to give them information. The Chinese have been caught so frequently. A bunch of professors at Harvard and different places have been apprehended just in the last couple of years because they're giving information to China. But then they have their own people here as well. A lot of these Chinese immigrants or students, so-called, actually have connections to the Chinese military intelligence. They're collecting information. They're stealing information. They're spies. They're causing dissent, like all the Confucius institutions that China has here. They're not here to promote cultural well-being and understanding and building bridges. That's a total lie. They're here to subvert American culture. Americanism is the holy water, the cross, the sunlight to this communist vampire that's sucking the blood out of the world. Americanism. our faith and families and freedom, this constitutional republic, our emphasis on individual liberty, personal freedom and rights, limited government, rule of law. That is anathema to what these other agitators stand for. Now, again, back to Louis Francis Boudin's in his book. He wrote, quote, "Garbing itself in the attire of a regular political party, the communist organization raises on behalf of its own legality the cry of those civil liberties which it officially declares it intends to abolish. The matter would be less confusing if the Red missionaries, in the guise of liberals, radio commentators, and trade unionists, were not so successful in preventing Americans from learning the truth about their conspiratorial setup. The whole fictitious character of this political party claim could be easily exposed if it were established, as it can be, from red documents and acts, that the so-called Communist Party is and always has been nothing other than one division of a dictator's army with which he hopes to conquer the world." Okay. To that same end, you could say RT, Russia Today. You could even say the Russian Orthodox Church. What's it called? The Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, I believe is the organizational name. They officially, a few years ago, swore allegiance to the Russian Orthodox Church, making them also a wing of the Soviet state, because the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia, Soviet Union, Russia, there's no difference, in modern-day Russia, was actually created by Joseph Stalin. It had been outlawed under the communist regime, and then Joseph Stalin personally recreated and set up the Moscow Patriarchate and staffed it with KGB agents. And this was proven. I give names and documents from Western intelligence sources and stuff of who these people were, posing as priests and whatnot in the Russian Orthodox Church. So this is a KGB organization, Russian intelligence, state-controlled, and it's the same thing in the United States. And it's the same thing again with the Communist Party, with all these various groups, Russia Today, any of these type of propaganda groups. Their whole purpose is to subvert our country. We need to understand they are a fifth column, as Boudin repeatedly said. They are a fifth column. Now, back to him. He said, quote, "The aim of this fifth column and of the dictatorship manipulating it is the violent destruction of the American Republic. It plans the conquest of the United States by setting up a world proletarian dictatorship guided and ruled by Joseph Stalin," insert the name Putin, "as comfortable as it may have been in the past. To evade that ugly reality, it can be evaded no longer. The fanatical hope, if you can call it that, which gives drive to these conspirators is the belief in the World October. This promised extension of the entire globe of the October Russian Revolution, which set up the Soviet dictatorship, is the dynamo of the communist movement. That whispered promise is on the lips of every obscure comrade. It is proudly proclaimed in every important speech and every fundamental book by every leader of the Soviet state. In the first pamphlet on communism I was given to study on entering the party, this pledge to wipe out the American government by fire and sword was stated in the most bloodthirsty terms. It is disconcerting, then, to hear and read the extensive speculations of certain men in public life about what Soviet Russia means to do and what its fifth column's plan. The Reds have said so clearly what their reason for existence is, and have so scrupulously and relentlessly pursued the path set out for them, that such speculations would be absurd were they not so tragic. There is no greater tribute to the effectiveness of the Soviet fifth column in this country than the obvious fact that it has befogged the American mind regarding its ruthless resolves to wipe out American independence. Nothing is so clear-cut as its continual insistence within its own ranks that violent attack upon the government here is highly essential. But so skilled are its propagandists, disguised as non-communists in the radio, newspapers, moving picture world, that they have made Americans believe every revelation of red espionage is the result of hysteria. They have done a fairly adequate job of making America ashamed of defending its own freedoms." Think about that. Think about it. That's cancel culture. They've made Americans ashamed of their own freedom. They've made Americans ashamed of Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, George Washington, and all these wonderful heroes, patriots, freedom fighters, and good men of our past. People who gave their lives, who their entire life, not just on the altar of sacrifice, but they gave everything they had, all of their energy, time, talents, to bringing about a free republic. Is it perfect? No, but it is the most perfect that has ever existed, of which we have record in the history of humanity. Yet you have Black Lives Matter and Antifa and these other communist organizations. That's what they are, communist organizations, marching around saying we need to overthrow the government. We need to oust Donald Trump. We need to steal your home. It's reparations. We're going to burn down your cities if you don't go along with us. We're going to destroy your statues. We're going to burn your flag. We're going to spit on your country, on your memory, on your legacy, on your people. We don't care. That's because they're dupes and agents of a hostile, foreign, or if you rather, international global power. It's amazing that we tolerate this. I mean, no sane country would tolerate this. And countries that have actually fought back in the way that is proper, in the way that the various acts that I've cited recommended, such as the Detention Act I talked about, when countries have done that, and here's a few names, you might be thrown for a loop for a moment, the fact that I'm supporting these names, but don't be. Do your research. Look behind the ludicrous painting of history that's been done, and look at the actual facts. Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Pinochet, right? Some men like that. Franco in Spain. These types of people, they fought back tooth and nail, militarily in every way they could, against communism. In each and every one of those cases, and a whole bunch more that I could cite, there was an attempt by the communist conspiracy, or wing thereof, to overthrow those countries. In Germany, there was a very, very strong and almost successful attempt at doing it. Same thing in Italy. Same thing in Spain through the Spanish Civil War. Same thing down in Central and South America. And they've succeeded in taking over quite a few countries, but in some cases there have been people who have fought back. And these people, without question, without exception, are declared to be authoritarian dictators. Oh, they're fascists. Well, here's a little insight. If you go and look back in the 50s and 60s, you can find FBI and congressional documents. I've seen them, I've looked at them, I've read them, where the communists, they told their agents here in the United States and in the West, but especially here in the United States, to declare any anti-communists to be, quote, fascists, Nazis, anti-Semites, Klansmen, white supremacists, and right-wing radicals. So when you see people being smeared by the controlled media as, oh, he's a Klansman, he's a white supremacist, he's a fascist, he's an authoritarian, he's a Nazi. Of course, anti-Semite and Nazi are the two worst ones you could ever be called, right? Because they've so poisoned minds against real history. When you see these labels, know that these people are actually fighting the communist conspiracy. Now, those organizations and people who are well known, who are not being labeled fascists, Nazis, anti-Semites, they are not putting up an effective resistance to this communist world conspiracy. Sorry, it's not happening. These groups are groups that the communists obviously think, oh, we can live with them. They're not hurting us one iota. But it's the groups like, InfoWars, which, I don't agree with everything Alex Jones says. Let's be clear on that. But InfoWars, they're labeled time and time and time again anti-Semitic. I mean, he bends over backwards to say, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Israel, things like that. And yet they still call him anti-Semitic, Nazi, fascist. It's because that's the script they have. That's the script they were given by the Kremlin. Anyone who opposes communism and is any bit successful at it is called a white supremacist. I've even seen black people called white supremacists because they were anti-Marxist. I mean, it's just hilarious. It is a script. It's the script the media, CNN, Embassy, all the others, BBC, the Associated Press, which is controlled by the Rothschilds, Reuters, and so on, they all use the same script written by the communists because they're controlled by the communists, the international communist elite. Okay, now that was a little bit of an aside, but it all ties in together to how well they have propagandized us into hating our own country, hating our own freedom, hating our Constitution, hating our ancestors, hating our own skin, those of us who are white. I mean, it's just crazy. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more quoting from Budins. Okay, he described a little bit how the Communist Party conspiracy operates. He said, the Soviet fifth column can be likened in organizational form to a tree. Its roots are the men and women of the deep underground, the political tourists, as they are called, sent here by Moscow to direct the life of the Communist Party. Such men are the direct mouthpieces of Moscow. They transmit instructions to the puppet party leaders of native origin. There are several scores of them. The trunk of the tree is the open party, which functions none too openly at that, from its national headquarters. They of the trunk are the means of contact which the men of the roots have with those concealed in the branches. And these last are the men and women who swear that they are not communists, and who operate as non-communists on an extensive scale. They are frequently defended by the responsible press, treated as people of the highest integrity, and move in circles where they play hob with American opinion. A little research would reveal their constant red associations and the wide range of their pro-Stalin acts. In religious literature, the devil is said never to be so triumphant as when he persuades men that he does not exist. It is much the same here. The Soviet fifth columnists are never more effective in advancing Stalin's objective of world conquest than when they get Americans to believe they are non-existent. Okay, and to the extent that we, and that was the end of the quote, to the extent that we have shied away from calling a spade and saying these people are communists, Black Lives Matter are communists, Antifa are communists, the communists are communists, Bernie Sanders is a communist, Kamala Harris is a communist, Joe Biden has dementia, but he's also a communist, Barack Obama was a communist mole, literally raised by his communist father to be one. Okay, these people are communists. They are ideological communists. You might try to say, oh no, they're globalists, but again, ignore the distinction. The principles are the identical, exact same between so-called globalism in the West and Marxism, communism, Leninism in the East. It's the same set of principles put forward by the Order of Illuminati back in the day. Still on the books, still using the same script, occasionally different outward labels. That was part of the original script. Always use a different outside label and put a mask on. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to evoke and enforce the Communist Control Act of 1954, signed into law by President Eisenhower, passed by the Congress, which outlaws the Communist Party, which says these people who do such and such a thing, such as promoting communist ideals, can be hauled before juries, penalized. Please, for the love of your country, support this anti-communist movement, which is beginning to rise and grow again. Come out against communism. Don't shy away from using that word. It's not a dirty word. Well, it is. It is a dirty word, but it needs to be said. It can't be ignored. If your neighbor's house is on fire during the middle of the night, what do? You probably call 911, right? Call the firefighters. But you probably also, at least if you're a good person, you run over, you pound on their door, you scream and holler, hey, are you people awake? Are you okay? Get out of there, your house is on fire. You raise all sorts of ruckus. But what are we doing? Our house is on fire. And there are so many people that are just going along with it. They see their neighbor's house on fire, and they're like, just let them sleep. It's wintertime anyway, they'll enjoy the heat. Right? No, you need to speak up. You need to yell and scream and holler and slam on the door. Break it down if you need to. Maybe there are children in there. Maybe these people are already passing out from smoke inhalation. I mean, there's so many parallels here in this analogy of a burning house in America today. America really is burning. It's burning. It's burning. So please, wake up. Start referring to the communists as communists. That's what they are. And that is what they fear most, especially socialists. Socialists who actually know that they're helping construct communism, they are terrified to be called communist. They do not want that communist label. They will do anything. They'll call themselves progressives. They'll call themselves moderates and liberals or Democrats. I mean, there are even some of these people in the Republican Party. Don't get me wrong. That's a shell, a stinking crater of a party. But the Democratic Party, though, they're just outright in your face. Yeah, we believe in the Green New Deal, which is just unvarnished communism. They just are in your face about it now. Yes, we want to abort babies after they're born. Things like that. They're just radical. So here's another quote, probably the last one I'll read, from Louis Francis Boudin's in his book Men Without Faces. He said, quote, "A true defense of civil liberties recognizes that the communists mean to destroy such liberties. To safeguard American freedom, the fifth column which menaces that freedom will have to be dealt with as a fifth column and not as something else, a legitimate political party, for example, which is pure fiction. God grant that America may have the alertness to distinguish fact from fancy, the wisdom to understand the true nature of her Soviet opponent, and the courage to stand firm for her own defense and that of all mankind." Close quote. Amen. We need to recognize it, and we need to fight fire with fire. If it means literally rounding these people up and putting them in detention centers and then trying them as traitors or as something else, criminals, felons, whatever you want to say, it doesn't really matter. We need to do it. People might cry and say, oh no, that would be a violation of their civil rights. Really? Would it be? Do people still have their so-called civil rights when they're destroying the rights of others? No, that's the one exception to the rule of having freedom. Unalienable rights, right? The one exception is if you were destroying someone else's rights. Then you forfeit your rights. You forfeit your right to life, liberty, and property when you destroy someone else's life, liberty, and property. When you come out in open rebellion against this country and say, we're going to tear down the Constitution, which is the act of the whole people, and which can only be changed by an act of the whole people, therefore. When you say that, you declare yourself an enemy to the Republic, and you must be dealt with as an enemy to the Republic, as a traitor. Now, even if there was no Communist Control Act, even if there was no Smith Act, even if we didn't have the ability somehow of putting forth another act with even more teeth in it, targeting these communists, ideological communists, even if that didn't exist, there is a basic principle. It's called the laws of necessity. And I've quoted this in my articles. Some people are terrified to say this. I hear people on my side of the political spectrum all the time, so-called conservatives, libertarians especially, who are terrified of this term, laws of necessity. They say, oh, look, tyranny always uses laws of necessity. This rationale to restrict rights and freedoms. Well, yes, it can happen, and it has happened. That's true. However, it is also true that it is a real principle. It is a legitimate principle. Here is what Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to John B. Colvin on September 20th, 1810. And now he has actually used this term, laws of necessity, and given the same rationale multiple times in multiple sources that I've found. But this is probably the most straightforward, coherent summation. He said, quote, "The question you propose, whether circumstances do not sometimes occur which make it a duty in officers of high trust to assume authorities beyond the law, is easy of solution in principle, but sometimes embarrassing in practice. A strict observance of the written laws is doubtless one of the high duties of a good citizen, but it is not the highest. The laws of necessity, of self-preservation, of saving our country when in danger, are of higher obligation. To lose our country by a scrupulous adherence to written law would be to lose the law itself, with life, liberty, property, and all those who are enjoying them with us, thus absurdly sacrificing the end to the means. Close quote. Okay, the laws of necessity for our country, they give us a right, even if the Constitution or laws such as the Communist Control Act did not, but they do. But even if they didn't, the laws of necessity give us the right to crush and exterminate this communist cockroach infestation in our country. We're all talking about pandemics now. The real contagion in the world is communism. It is the Red Plague, as I frequently call it, the Red Plague. This Red Plague is devouring the whole world. It's consuming our country right now. Literally, cities are burning. Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Baltimore, and so forth. They're burning. They're on fire. And who is putting the fuel down? Communists. Self-declared Marxist-trained agitators, like the Black Lives Matter founders. They just said we're communist agitators. We're trained Marxists. How can anyone deny this? How can anyone deny the need to come out as anti-communist? How can anyone deny the need to enforce, just strictly at the point of a gun, enforce the Communist Control Act? Who can deny that? If you love this country, you cannot deny this country its right to self-preservation. And that's what we're talking about. This is do or die. This is life and death. This is self-preservation. Communism is treason. If you take nothing away from today, take that away. Communism is treason. It is abhorrent. It is satanic. It is a conspiracy, literally a conspiracy by the textbook definition of the word conspiracy. Its stated goal is the overthrow of the entire world, bringing the whole world under a gangster dictatorship run by a criminal elite who are actually satanic pedophiles and just total occultists at the very top. But on a more practical level, they are criminals, just like Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin were, literal bank robbers. Today, they're literal plunderers, though they usually use the law or acts of Congress or the Federal Reserve to plunder us. So they don't have to come into your home and put a gun to your head and say, give us your money, stick them up. They don't need to do that today because they've gained control of our government. They've gained control of our money through the Federal Reserve. And so they just extort us anyway. And then they have their private army, the IRS, who will show up with guns if you don't pay them what they want you to pay them. But this is a criminal mafia global dictatorship that is communist in its principles 100%. You can call it socialist if you want. I use the term sometimes, but do not ever differentiate those principles from those laid down in the Communist Manifesto. It is communism, and communism is treason. Let's come together as Americans and defeat this treasonous, cancerous conspiracy in our midst. We need to crush it. We need to quarantine it. First of all, identify it. Second of all, quarantine it. Third of all, eradicate it by any means necessary. Like the laws of necessity give us the right to do. So God bless us in our effort to crush this criminal conspiracy which has been in our soil for at least 101 years. Though it's, of course, longer. The Communist Party, as such, has been here 101 years. I would really love to not see it reach 102. I'm probably dreaming, but this is going to lead to civil war, folks, if we don't do this now. If we don't round these people up and penalize them and destroy their publications and organizations, if we don't do that, we will be forced to draw guns on one another because they will start riots on a massive scale They will bring this country to its knees in civil war and anarchy and mobocracy. And then at that point, they will launch their long decades planned surprise nuclear strike on this country, surprise invasion of Europe and the world. And where will we be then? I think it's much easier to round these people up now while there's still some semblance of stability left than to do it later in the midst of a civil war. You cannot mistake who these people are. They admit it. They admit that they're Marxists. They are communists. They are radicals who hate the Constitution. They hate Christianity. They hate traditional mores and values. They hate our history. They hate us. So what are we going to do about it? Please share this. Get this word out to other people. And as always, Sic Semper Tyrannis. Long live liberty.